Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizengauzen. Today is October 18th and there are many important and interesting news stories. So in this episode, a powerful explosion at one of Russia's key defense factories. It turns out Putin was telling Trump about Rurik, which just completely threw Trump off. Meanwhile, the Federation Council is threatening a direct strike with a nuclear warhead. What exactly they're threatening over will be covered in this episode. The head of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service made a statement that basically paints Putin as the main agent of the West. And Trump is demanding a halt along the front line and a ceasefire. Lukashenko is negotiating with Europe behind the Kremlin's back while Hungary promises to bring Putin home alive. But can Hungary really guarantee that? That's what we'll be talking about in today's episode and more. If this is your first time on this channel, subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes. So, the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, with the call sign Magyar, has been officially labeled a terrorist by the Russians. Let me remind you, ever since Magyar was appointed to this position, Russia's fuel and energy sector has been suffering real pain from Ukrainian drone strikes. In September alone, units of the unmanned systems forces struck 39 targets of Russia's fuel and energy complex. And in just 2 weeks of this month, already 57 targets have been hit. And there's more to come, wrote Magyar. Well, as I always say, the sanctions from Magyar, from the SBU, from the GUAR, and from the armed forces of Ukraine are the most effective sanctions. And as for to be continued, here it is. In response to Russia's energy terror, Pleshivo and Mali decided to remind everyone that this game can be played by two. And that night, drones attacked the important 500-kilowatt Vishkaima substation. This is one of the key energy hubs of the Volga region, and it has been put out of commission. This is a key node of the Volga power ring, which connects the energy systems of Ulyanovsk, Mordovia, Chuvashia, and Samara, 800 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. Now the Russians will start yelling again that the drones are being launched from Kazakhstan because it's only 300 kilometers to the border with Kazakhstan. They just can't accept that Ukrainian drones are already flying more than 2,000 kilometers and successfully hitting targets on Russian territory, and that's not even the limit. But that's not all. Meanwhile, a powerful explosion occurred at the Avangard plant in Russia's Bashkortostan region. There, at that plant, explosives for munitions are produced. In other words, local social media are reporting a complete collapse of the workshop. Well, if you're making shells to kill Ukrainians, then be prepared to answer for it. And here's how it's burning. Take a look at this video. This plant, a defense enterprise, is part of a state corporation and of course is involved in fulfilling state defense orders. And in addition to explosives, it also manufactures components for missiles and rocket systems. Well then. And by the way, locals are saying this was sabotage, blaming the Ukrainian Mossad, in other words, the GUR and the SBU. Several people simply can't be found there. That's how big the explosion was. They didn't show up at the evacuation point, but you know, the phrase burned out at work has taken on a whole new meaning. Let's just say they burned out professionally. Because if you use your own hands to make explosives for shells and missiles that are fired at Ukrainian cities, the Ukrainian Mossad will come for you and punish you. Against the backdrop of Trump's talks with Putin and Trump's meeting with Zelensky, by the way, some very interesting details have surfaced about that. Very strange meeting in Alaska, details that hadn't been mentioned before. Putin insisted there that the war would only end if Ukraine fulfilled all of Moscow's conditions. This was reported by the Financial Times. And then Putin started telling Trump about Rurik, about Russian princes. Well, how Russian are they really? Rurik. Then he started talking about Yaroslav the Wise and then about the Cossack ataman Bohdan Khmelnytsky. Trump was completely shocked, writes the Financial Times. He even raised his voice several times and in the end interrupted the meeting and cancelled the planned lunch. Just imagine, this paper rat Putin, everywhere he tries to tell his own version of history and explain something with these versions of history, he probably also carries around that cardboard folder with strings, filled with pages printed out for him from books and encyclopedias. Now, I understand what Steve Witkoff was doing for 5 hours with Putin. He listened to all this nonsense, starting from the Polovtsians, the Pechenegs, and maybe even earlier, I don't even know. And old man Kabaev, he only picks the historical periods that are convenient for him. That is the times when, in his opinion, Russia was great. And for sure, I saw the news today that Putin definitely associates and compares himself with Peter the Great. I mentioned that he once said or told some Russian journalist that just like Peter the Great, he is annexing lands, or more precisely, as he put it, returning and strengthening them. This is already completely off the rails. So maybe we should pick another period of history. Maybe then Russia would have to give most of its territory to Mongolia and pay tribute again. All these pseudo-historical references are just to prove that Ukraine doesn't exist, to justify their own convenient truth, like claiming Ukraine is a made-up country. Why do you care what kind of country Ukraine is within its internationally recognized borders? And by the way, Russia also recognized those borders at one time. We can do whatever we want here, even pass a law to walk around the streets with our bare backsides. What business is it of yours, you loudmouths? And by the way, if Ukraine doesn't exist, if Ukraine is a made-up country, then who has been handing you your ass for the 4th year in a row, you Botox jellyfish? This is exactly about those who, they're the ones handing it to you. Friends, we're raising funds again. Another important fundraiser for, and I'm not afraid to say it, the legendary Azov. The Special Forces sniper unit of the Azov Brigade is asking for help raising funds for reconnaissance drones. Believe me, in the hands of Azov snipers, these drones will work wonders, and there will be no place left for those occupiers who came to our land. And right now, they are holding the defense in the Pokrovsky direction and have recorded a video message addressed to us. Please take a look.
Слава Україні! Ми загін снайперів спеціального призначення бригади Азов. Звертаємося до Бориса Тизенгаузена та його спільноти за допомогою. Для виконання спеціальних задач наш загін потребує розвідувальних дронів. Будемо вдячні кожному і кожній. Слава нації!
The mere mention of Azov makes the occupiers feel uneasy. I ask you to support this collection. The link to the collection is in the description of this video. There is Mono, Private, and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. I say a huge thank you to all of you, from ourselves and from our defenders. If you don't see the details, there's a QR code that you can use to start the collection process. When the Federation Council of Russia threatened a nuclear strike on Ukraine if Ukraine attacked Russia with tomahawks, Deputy Chairman of the Federation Council, Konstantin Kosachev, stated that Moscow would launch a nuclear strike in the event of a possible Ukrainian attack with Tomahawk missiles on Russia. And I quote, even a non-specialist understands that that is the transfer of Tomahawk missiles, is an absolutely direct path to nuclear war. Because when a missile that could potentially carry a nuclear warhead is flying towards a nuclear power, the answer will be completely obvious. It will be nuclear, the senator said. Let me remind you that Russian Kinzhal missiles can also potentially carry a nuclear warhead. Iskanders could also potentially carry a nuclear warhead. That is, a nuclear power can do this towards Ukraine, launch missiles and hit with them. But Ukraine can't. And Ukraine is that very country that does not exist. It turns out that the Russians are already saying that we will immediately respond with nuclear weapons. By the way, I still haven't found any structural material that would tell me what's actually happening with Russia's nuclear arsenals. And there is a feeling that not everything is good there. Earlier, I recall Medvedev made a similar statement saying that it was impossible to distinguish a nuclear tomahawk from a non-nuclear one, so we would take revenge. And at that time, he personally threatened Donald Trump. I'll tell you this, distinguish nuclear from non-nuclear. When Medvedev crushes a flask, he has trouble distinguishing anything from anything. Well, by the way, as Kosachev emphasized, a scenario in which Russia would not resort to a nuclear attack in the event of failure on the battlefield is unrealistic. This is a very interesting statement. It is simply impossible to imagine a situation where we are losing and still not using nuclear weapons. This is a completely different statement. This is important. He stated that if Russia loses the war, he will strike with nuclear weapons. But the main question is, what do they consider a loss? The loss of someone else's occupied land or just their own when they come to them and start marching on Moscow? because I will remind you that the Russians were expelled from Kiev, from the Kharkiv region, from Kherson, from the Chernihiv region. So why didn't they strike then, I wonder? I mean, they're just enduring. By the way, let me just remind you that according to its own nuclear doctrine, Russia should have used nuclear weapons a long time ago. Ukraine has met practically all the criteria of Russia's nuclear doctrine. It attacked the nuclear triad. Remember that unique web operation when they burned strategic bombers? And before that, they destroyed Russian over-the-horizon radars, which are supposed to warn Russia about missile launches. The armed forces of Ukraine entered Kursk Oblast, which was also a reason to use them. And according to the new updated doctrine, a mass launch of aerial targets, meaning drones, is also a reason to use nuclear weapons, and also ballistic missile strikes on their territory. So there you have it. All 4 points have been met. Ukraine has met them all. Putin will not use nuclear weapons. First of all, simply no one has attacked Russia. And for Putin, it's important for Putin now to somehow get out of this shameful war. And most importantly, the reason Putin won't use nuclear weapons is because he's the coward, pardon my French. Anything that could subsequently threaten him personally and his life, he will not do, meaning he's terrified of dying. That's why he's dug all these rat holes, these bunkers for himself all over the country. Remember how he received everyone at that 10-meter-long table so that, God forbid, some bacillus wouldn't take out the bald jellyfish. And now for our segment, it's all the cursed West's fault. The head of the Foreign Intelligence Service has accused Western intelligence agencies of trying to strip Russia of its influence over the CIS countries. Have you ever seen such a thing? The West, and I'm quoting Narishkin, the West has intensified its efforts to destabilize the Commonwealth of Independent States. Lately, we've been observing a trend of attempts by a number of Western countries, primarily European ones, to provoke disintegration processes within the CIS. Well, he emphasized that the goal of Western regimes and intelligence services is to contain the development of the CIS as an independent, sovereign center of power. Meanwhile, Putin, just a couple of days ago, stated that it's important for the former republics of the USSR not to drift too far apart from each other, those that are part of the CIS. No matter how great the cultural differences were among the peoples of the former Soviet Union, there was still some kind of single moral and ethical code of the Soviet person. And preserving everything inherited from the Soviet Union is the task that the CIS is meant to solve, Putin emphasized, so that they don't drift apart. You see, the fact that Putin's own cuckoo has flown the coop is a fact. So initially the CIS, now we're going to find out who made it so that the CIS practically ceased to exist and who Narishkin actually blamed. Initially, the CIS was supposed to include countries like Azerbaijan, Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, and Georgia.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
In 2008, Georgia left the CIS because Russia attacked Georgia. In 2014, Ukraine ceased all cooperation after Russia attacked Ukraine, occupied Donbas and annexed Crimea. With Azerbaijan and Armenia, you all remember how Russia ruined relations. Kazakhstan, just like Ukraine, is also constantly called a not real state. In Moldova, they tried to rig elections, and at the start of the full-scale invasion, they were saying that they'd reach Transnistria now, and then, take Moldova. So they're constantly trying to destabilize the situation in Moldova. They're at war with Ukraine. So if, according to Narishkin, the West is to blame for this, then it turns out Putin is the West's top agent. And also, at night, Western leaders, in case you didn't know, are destroying Russian roads and defecating in Russian apartment building entrances. That's also a fact. It's time to stop the killing and make a deal. I'm not even going to say who said that. I think you guessed right away from the word deal. That's how Trump commented on his talks with Zelensky. Quote, "The meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was very interesting and friendly, but I told him, just as I strongly recommended to Putin, that it's time to stop the killing and make a deal. Enough of the bloodshed when borders and property are determined by war and bravery. They have to stop where they are. Let them both claim victory and let history decide. No more shots, no more death, no more huge, unaffordable sums of money. This is a war that never would have started if I were president. Thousands of people are being killed every week. Enough, go home to your families in peace. Let me just remind you that Ukrainians never wanted war. That's true. And actually, we don't need to go anywhere. We're already at home. But the ones who really need to be told, go home to your families, are that bio-waste that Putin brought to our land. And here Trump says they should stop where they are, meaning he's talking about both Ukraine and Russia. So I interpret this to mean that in a phone call, possibly with Putin, this issue was settled or at the very least discussed. And Putin is probably ready to stop at the front line, even though he wasn't ready to discuss that in Alaska. That is, he was saying, that's it. We want 4 regions completely, Crimea. But after the meeting in Hungary, if it happens, of course, everything will become clear. How Putin is going to fashion this victory out of modeling clay, matches, and acorns, I don't quite understand. That's why I don't believe him. A lying, disgusting, cowardly reptile who attacked the wrong people. And now for another one of our segments, the sly-ass potato. Lukashenko has started separate negotiations with Europe on normalizing relations. Well, who would have doubted it? Who would have doubted it? Belarus has proposed to the European Union countries to start negotiations on normalizing relations in order to get out of the political isolation the country has been in since 2020, Reuters reported, citing sources among European diplomats. That is, at the end of September, the Belarusian embassy in Paris sent out emails to the representative offices of several countries and asked for meetings. And several European diplomats agreed to a meeting, and according to one of them, the Belarusian ambassador was trying to make it clear that Minsk wants to get out of political isolation and can help in settling the war between Russia and Ukraine, and can also help in negotiations on European security. Let me remind you, Lukashenko is the kind of character who, much like Putin, basically creates a problem first and then offers to solve it for the world in exchange for some cash, or some bonuses, or some favors. And one of the Reuters sources noted that Minsk sensed an opportunity opened up by US President Donald Trump to have sanctions lifted and decided to seize the moment. Well, who would have doubted it? By the way, I'll remind you, Trump gave Lukashenko cufflinks with an image of the White House. He passed them on to him. What a guy. All these gifts, cufflinks, some rings. What is even going on with you people? Those who have been watching my shows for a long time can attest that I've always said that in The Hague, Lukashenko will be screaming, "It wasn't me, they made me do it," and he'll be the first to run and turn Putin in when the heat is on. That is, he'll pretend to be an old, sick pensioner whom Putin practically held hostage. But however, we should remember that he is just as much of an accomplice as Putin, and the nasty things he does to his neighbors are also coordinated with Putin. I'm talking about the launch of drones from the territory of Belarus, and I'm talking about how they're terrorizing Poland with migrants from their territory. In short, the expired potato pancake must get what he deserves. By the way, I periodically check up on what he's doing. He has a Telegram channel that his courtiers run for him. So just now he opened a center for the technical creativity of children and youth, like the old Palace of Pioneers. They had some modeling clubs, robotics. And the opening ceremony was very innovative, There was this box with some gears drawn on it. And on top of this box there was foil. And out of this box, some robot emerged. Well, it didn't emerge. Some mechanism just lifted it up. It tore through the foil and basically just stayed there. And that was the grand opening. By the way, they also presented Lukashenko with an innovative new product, a robot vacuum cleaner. A real novelty, And Lukashenko said that Belarus needs to start producing robot vacuum cleaners. Well, yeah, of course, one would hope that some giant robot vacuum cleaner would suck up that mustachioed cockroach and let the people of Belarus live in peace. Let's make sure Putin gets home safe. Hungary has promised not to arrest Putin during his meeting with Trump. Putin does not face arrest on the warrant from the International Criminal Court during his trip to Budapest. This was announced by the Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó. Well, of course, it's all perfectly clear. The great provider is coming to Orban to kiss his little hands for the oil, for the gas, for everything else. In short, Putin will return home safe and sound. And Orban stated that Budapest is not going to consult with its allies about Putin's visit because Hungary is a sovereign nation. When it's time to take money from European funds, Orban runs a real marathon of blackmail. It's just amazing. When it suits him, he's sovereign, and when it doesn't, sovereign means independent. Just cut off the Russian oil and gas, and let's see how independent Orban will be from them. And yeah, this meeting, honestly, I don't even understand what Putin used to buy Trump off again. What did he promise him this time? It's like, just give me a couple more weeks, we'll meet in Hungary, there'll be a super offer. But what about Alaska? Why wasn't there? It was the same thing. They were all set to go, and then it turned out they misunderstood each other. Believe me, the same thing is going to happen now. And Peskov has stated that it's not yet clear how Putin will get to Hungary, since there are restrictions on Russian aircraft flying over EU countries. What's not clear? There's that oil pipeline, there's a pipe from Russia. For Russians, crawling through pipes is some kind of national pastime. Remember that wild incident in Yekaterinburg near the Church on the Blood, the church built on the site where the royal family was executed? They set up an exhibition dedicated to that Potok operation when Russians were crawling through a pipe into Sudzha. So, they placed a 16-meter piece of pipe in front of the temple so that the Russians could feel what the occupiers felt when they climbed through this pipe, and a crowd of Russians climbed through this pipe. At the exit, a concert was waiting for them, performed by, that is, Vaika Tsiganova, another one who was beaten, Putin's favorite lover. And she sang the words that her song had written, that her husband had written. It had dawned on him. Brilliant words are simply in quotation marks. Trumpet is a Russian word. A pipe means a pipe. But that's not all there is. There was also a giant cheburashka dancing to all of this. Imagine yourself drunk. The horde is crawling through the pipe, climbing out. There's this gypsy woman screaming. Demons are crawling out of her. A giant cheburashka is dancing. Some Cossack children were standing there or something. In general, the initiator of this ball of Satan was the rector of this very temple. This is what Russia is all about. But both Poland and Italy refused to extradite the Nord Stream explosion suspects to Germany. The Polish court refused. He refused to extradite Ukrainian citizen and diving instructor Vladimir Zhuravlev to Germany, who is suspected of blowing up Russia's Nord Stream gas pipeline, and the detainee was ordered to be released immediately. And the court pointed out that those who accused him need to be accused and put in jail. Look, the court ruled that a Ukrainian citizen cannot be held responsible for the destruction of the country's gas pipelines, which attacked and is at war with his country. This is right, this is absolutely wonderful. So then it turns out that Magyar should also be convicted. He also hits Russian oil and gas pipelines. Are you really in Europe or something? In Germany, more precisely? All in all, didn't commit any crimes naturally. Incidentally, in Italy, the appellate court's decision to extradite Sergei Kuznetsov, who is also accused of sabotaging the Nord Streams, was also overturned. Well, the man should be given an order for freeing someone from addiction, from oil and gas addiction, or more precisely in this case, from gas addiction. But who drove Germany into this dependence? And we know Europe well, right, Mrs. Merkel? Well, one more piece of news. I'm worried about it. Yes, anxiety. Now, there is just a little bit left here. Russians set a 40-year record for buying antidepressants. That is 33% more Russians are using antidepressants than last year. But you, my friends, I always remind you, have your own antidepressant, calm analytics. So, yes, as for Russians, you can say to Putin, as the saying goes, "Thank you, Putin, for our depressive childhood." I think that when hundreds of thousands of thugs who were rounded up from all over the country in Russia, emptying all the prisons, return from the war, that's when you'll see record sales, and even antidepressants won't help then. And it's absolutely obvious that the consequences of the blow this war will inflict on Russia and the Russian economy will be felt for many, many years to come. Meaning, Putin will have to start another war somewhere else so that Russians don't look at their deteriorating living conditions and their salaries. As for you, my friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones. Let's support our warriors from Azov. Subscribe to the channel. I wish you all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.